A diary from Germany, 1918. Do you know what inflation means? Is how it starts. I want to talk about inflation today and what happens when it spirals out of control. How do circumstances even get that bad? I showed you three factors that led to Weimar Republic and their troubles, but I want to focus on the second one for a minute. The economic crisis of unprecedented proportions. It's what happened here. It's happened all over the world. Argentina went through something like that back in 2001. Conditions had deteriorated so badly that government bonds were selling for pennies on the dollar, and Argentina had to renegotiate her debt with all of her creditors. Well, almost. You see, they couldn't actually pay for a lot of their debt. They had to do what you've heard in the news before, give people haircuts. Well, one of the hedge funds here in America decided they weren't going to take a haircut. They wanted every dollar. And so recently they just seized a ship belonging to the Argentine Navy. Elliott Capital Management refused to restructure their portion of Argentina's debt, and they said, "We want our money." Court decisions in the United Kingdom and the United States confirmed that Elliott's capital position was legitimate and said that they could hold out for all of the money. The ship, ironically named Libertad, was then seized by the capital management company. They just took that ship. It belongs to Argentina, but it pulled into Ghana, and it was docked in Ghana in October. And when it pulled in, they brought the court papers to Ghana and said, "It's mine. We want it. They owe us money. We want this." And they took it. This action set a new precedent. Hedge fund managers inside and outside of Elliott Capital and here in the United States and all over the world are celebrating as a victory. Really? Really, the sovereign nation has had its military assets seized by a private fund as debt collateral. And no one in America is alarmed. Of course not. They owe that money, and it's just Argentina. If it can happen to them, why not us? We don't see the hump on our own backs. What happens when China comes calling? Hey, how much money do we owe Russia? When they say, hey, we want to collect on some serious scratch that we've given you. Will it come upon us like it came upon Argentina, quickly and unexpectedly? Germany was seen as the bad guy after World War I. The countries of Europe all got together and bullied them. They felt we were owed because Germany started the war. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Do you think we're going to be the saviors? Do you think people are going to be as easy to forgive our debt when they're going to blame it on America? It was American capitalism that started the pain all over the world. Do you really think that this isn't going to happen to us? Here's how it started. Unrelenting debt collection and seizure of key assets. This is what happened in Germany. They just started taking the assets. What do you think is going to happen to our Coca-Cola plant? In India or in Europe? What do you think? Do you think they make a difference? They look at us differently than Coca-Cola? That's American. What about all of our warplanes and our ships in port? You think they're not just going to take them? This is the story of hyperinflation in Weimar, Germany, from the point of Elsa Mattson. She warns us of all of this because she lived through it.
Do you know what inflation means? I'm not an expert on this subject. I simply went through the German inflation myself. And the following is a picture of this dreadful experience as I remember it. May my story begin with the year 1918, which marks the end of World War, lost for the Germans. 4 years of the most cruel suffering and losses had turned into the unbelievable fact of defeat. Where were we going now? At that time, I was a young girl attending high school in Wiesbaden. Through the war, Germany was blockaded and therefore could hold out only a certain time, using up its large reserves. But by the time the reserves were used up, everybody was sure that the war would long be over. A few skepticals, however, thought it safer to fill up shelves and drawers. Influenced by speculative advertising, soon everybody wanted to be safe for months ahead, and the people began rushing to the stores. This buying boom, of course, raised the prices, and the scarcer the goods became, the more feverish people bought, and the higher the prices roared up. People rushed to the banks, taking out all the money available, and those who could afford it bought in carload dimensions. The state was forced to take quick action by closing the banks and stores and confiscating all goods. Thousands of agencies sprang up overnight to measure up what there was and to divide it into so much a head. The state gave out cards, monthly or weekly, the amounts of one's share varying with the state's researches. Lots of trouble ensued with the farmers who were to sell their products only to the government. They also were not to feed their animals with food suitable for men. Thus the months went by, and one's food rations became lower and lower.
Does any of this sound unreasonable? Those bleak conditions immediately following World War I. These scenes are all from the Weimar Republic. Germany was not self-sufficient. It had built reserves. It believed it would carry it through the war. However, as the soldiers returned home, supplies began to dwindle. People began to hoard. Instead of being cautious and building up slowly over time, they panicked and they hoarded. And that caused things to get much worse. And so, the government stepped in. A harsh and excessive payment schedule imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, which, by the way, was imposed by Woodrow Wilson. And the German government was pushed into extreme measures. They began printing money, backed by nothing. They got off the gold standard. They had to make reparation payments to other countries. The powers of the world demanded it. Every mark that was printed made the ones printed before worth less and less. The more money they printed, the more devastating the effects on the economy. Watch.
Gradually there was a better supply, but now the trouble was that the prices remained at a level way beyond the reach of the average person. Yet here the prices kept on going up, the wages always limping far behind, and people stood gazing before the store windows, seeing things they bitterly needed, yet never could afford to buy. Suddenly a new word sprang up. Everybody talked about it to find out what it meant. It was the word inflation. We were right in it. When did it begin? When and how would it end? Was inflation the expression for continued racketeering? Prices jumped up faster and higher than ever before, from week to week, from day to day, and finally from hour to hour. Saving meant certain loss and losing out. Therefore, the only certain things to do was to spend to the bottom all one yet was able to earn. People bought what they could get hold of, things they needed and things they did not know what to do with, just to spend, and spend quickly the little they had, because maybe tomorrow they could buy only a fraction for what they could pay for right now. Credits, of course, were also long a thing of the past. With salary in the pocket, the next thing to do was to rush to the stores and dispose of every penny. But the tragedy with wage earners was that their salaries were fixed at the beginning of the month or week and paid out at the end of the month or week, never taken into consideration a devaluation of money in between. The money earned bought less and less each week. Can you visualize what this meant to those who had lived from their bank accounts? When I started working, I earned a few hundred marks a month, then thousands of marks a week, hundreds of thousands. After that, I rose into the rank of the multimillionaire, receiving tens of millions, hundreds of millions, dividing them finally into a loaf of bread, maybe some cheap bologna or Limburger cheese. Finally, I received billions. But at the end of the last week, when I received hundreds of billions, I could buy just about one roll and had left not even enough to buy the cheapest post stamp. This was the climax of the inflation.
This is a diary of warning to all the people of the world. She says, can you imagine? No, most people can't. People were actually receiving their pay like this. They would bring wheelbarrows. At one point, people were getting paid hourly, and then they would have to go out and spend the money. If you ordered a cup of coffee, you would pay for it at that time. You wouldn't sit and drink coffee, because the price of that coffee would be more when you walked out than when you ordered the coffee. It was actually cheaper to take your money, and some people would do it by the shovelful, and burn it. People would put it in big barrels and set it on fire. It was a lot easier to warm yourself by the fire of burning money than it was to actually spend it. You couldn't spend it. It was worthless. It was worth less than the paper it was printed on. The kids, they could no longer afford any kind of toys. So you better put that out. I wouldn't put it out with water. Oh boy. Oh boy. Now we're seeing this. We can't do this in New York. We got to do this in Texas, where we can set things on fire. The kids actually couldn't afford toys. And so really the kids would play with cash. But it wasn't so bad. If you look here, they could actually make some really impressive model skyscrapers with just a portion of that week's wages. You've heard of the phrase, the bubble's about to burst. Well, let me demonstrate. This is what is happening to us right now, and nobody's really paying much attention. The bubble is about to burst. And what it means is we print money. And this is normally how we print money. Ben Bernanke is printing money. When he got in, we just print a little bit. But when that wasn't enough, he decided to print more money. And when this isn't enough, when you can't print that much, and that won't pay for your debt, then you have to print more money. More money, more money, more money, until you're just covered in money. Our printing presses are becoming bubble machines, and the bubbles will eventually come down and burst. But Germany, Zimbabwe, the United States, we're just printing money. But it will burst. All business activity in Germany ceased. Banks that went on what Elsa called indefinite holiday, where everything was shut down, you just lost your money. Even farms couldn't pay the field hands to harvest their crops anymore, as they were dying in the fields and on the vine. Eventually, a portion of the crops themselves were traded as a payment to those who would harvest them. A barter system began to emerge, but by then circumstances were so ripe to create intense gratitude and devotion in the German people for anybody who was charismatic enough that could guide them out of the catastrophe of hyperinflation. See, that's the real problem. After the currency and the bubbles burst, you need somebody to lead you out. And boy, will someone be willing to show you a new way of shared sacrifice and show you the people who are responsible for creating all of these bubbles, whether they were or not. Back in a minute.